for that warm introduction. A little bit more about Roche in the U.S. We have 23,000 employees spread across all of the U.S., consisting of pharma and the diagnostic division. So we are covering, under our health plans, about 55,000 lives because we do cover spouses and children. The corporate office of where I sit is in San Francisco, and our other corporate office in diagnostics is Indiana. So what are we going to talk about? What are the three topics I'm going to talk to you about today? One is our overall U.S. benefit philosophy, these and our guiding principles, and this is what we look at every single time we're going to make a plan change or add a program to make sure that we're not compromising our philosophy or the guiding principles. With that, one of the things that I do is strategy. So when we're looking at healthcare cost, we're looking at 3, 5, and 7 years out and trying to predict and set plans up in order to meet the demands and try to control costs over those time periods. The other thing I want to talk about is that concept of consumerism, and what does that really mean for employees and for an employer? Couple that with the account-based health plan. As you heard from Ron today, these have been in the U.S. starting in about 2003. Roche just put their plan in 2015. So we're a little bit late to the party, and I'll talk about why that is. But throughout my discussion, I'm going to talk about more on the healthcare for the U.S. and intersperse our experience in putting in this account-based health plan. It was also called this morning from Ron, consumer-driven healthcare. It's the same thing, we just use the terms, but they actually mean the same thing. In terms of the philosophy, for the employers that are out there, I'm sure you all have a philosophy and guiding principles very similar. So I'm not going to talk about each of the components here, but there are two things I wanted to talk about with you. When we talk about competitive positioning, for us, we are very concerned about what's happening in the pharmaceutical industry as well as the diagnostic division in terms of what we're providing compared to those companies in our same industry. So when I talked about being a little late to the party, no one in pharmaceuticals wanted to be the first ones to offer these account-based health plans. But as soon as the first one put one in, then the rest of us followed. So that's why in 2003, the companies that have very low type margins were probably the first companies to adopt these plans, and those would be retailers and restaurants and hotel firms. But now it's going to be, I'll show you some numbers, and it's pretty widespread throughout all of industry. The second thing I wanted to talk about on the guiding principles that really are very relevant to today's discussion is driving value and cost efficiency for our employees and our company. And the reason that is important to us is that employees do pay, through their paycheck, a contribution every single paycheck towards the cost of coverage. In addition to that, they also pay when they go and see a doctor or have surgery or are hospitalized. So there's two components that employees have to pay out of their pocket. They want to know that what we're providing to them is of a high value, and we're doing the best we can in terms of maintaining those costs. When we're looking at healthcare, what we know is there is not just one silver bullet to solving the crisis, that we have to look at it in many, many different components. I have 9 here. I'm not able due to time to talk about each of those 9, but the slide, what we're trying to say is that has to be a number of different components working at the same time to help us control those costs. And this is the 5 to 7 year plan. Not every single component can be deployed each year. We have to decide based on what's happening in the market which ones we'll be focusing on, but over time each one of those would be deployed. The green bubbles represent the three areas that we are focused on right now. That's around wellness, and we heard a lot about that with Cesar today. The second is cost sharing, and as I mentioned, it's very, very important for our employees because they pay quite a bit of the cost. And then another thing that Cesar had mentioned is around communication, to tell employees why this is important and what's in it for them. Okay, now switching gears and going to what is happening in the U.S. healthcare market. This is what I call our good news, bad news slide. So the good news is that if you see, starting in 2005, we ended starting to decrease our healthcare inflation, the healthcare cost, from double digits. And the red line is the consumer price index. And even though we see our healthcare trend has been coming down, it still by far exceeds the CPI. And when you have employees' salaries that are based on the regular rate of inflation, each year, because our contributions are tied to the healthcare increases we experience each year, more and more of their paycheck is going towards healthcare. Now, what Towers Watson did starting in 2007 is to start tracking what is the healthcare trend for employers that didn't do anything to their health plans. And that's the green line. And then the blue bars from 2007 represent healthcare trend that employers experienced when they made plan changes. So you can see that although employers had made some headway in making some changes, on average, there's really, at this point, still just a 5% difference in overall healthcare trend for those employers that are really trying hard to control their costs. So what I wanted to show you is just an example over the last 15 years of employee contributions. So this is just what we, on average, and this is the US, this isn't Roche-specific information, but in 2001, on average, an employee was paying $355 US a year from their paycheck. Fast forward to today, because of the healthcare trend, it is now close to $1,100, which represents a 7.6% increase year after year. And of course, for families, it's even higher. Most employers will charge a little bit more for those with family coverage, starting at close to $1,800 back in 2001. They are close to spending, just through their paycheck, over $5,000 a year for their health care coverage. When we looked at the slide that showed the trend differences between an employer who didn't make changes and those that did, knowing those are averages. So it's not unusual for some employers to have experienced even double-digit trend if they haven't changed their plan. And on the other end of the spectrum, some employers were very lucky and saw a very low trend if they changed their plan, 0 to about 3%. So what we were looking at is saying, well, what's driving that variability in healthcare costs? And while there are a number of things, like the circle that you saw at the beginning, not just one thing, we picked what we think are three of the major factors in why in the US you have a significant difference in costs from one industry to the next. The first is around participation. And again, Cesar talked about that today. What we did at Roche 3 years ago, we had said to our employees, we will cover your spouse and your children, but if your spouse works for another employer and your spouse decides not to take the coverage they're offering and you want to put the spouse on our plan, we'll let you do that, but you're going to have to pay an additional $200 a year. It's the honor system, but we did see a number of spouses that were terminated from our plan. So we think that's a success. The other piece about the variation in healthcare cost, obviously it's the subsidies that the employer decides. So an employer that says, we're just going to take your contribution from your paycheck, and any other time you go to the doctor, everything will be paid at 100%. Obviously, those healthcare costs are going to be significantly different from those employers that made changes. And when we talk about plan changes, it might be adding a deductible, adding a copay when you're going to the doctor. The last piece is around efficiency. And there's a lot under there. The only one I'm going to highlight is around engagement and consumerism. Because what does that engagement piece mean? Because we find that the populations in an employee sector that are more engaged in their health care, the costs are lower. And why is that? I talked about the variation in healthcare cost by employer. We also have in the US a significant variation in what providers charge for the same test or the same surgery, whether it be an MRI or whether it be hip replacement. And the variation can swing substantially. So as an example, we have a provider, we're going to use the MRI example. We have a provider we know that charges $500 for a test. And down the road, another provider for the same MRI will charge $3,000. Myself as an employee just went to the doctor. The doctor tells me I need an MRI. I go and I look at my health plan and it says, oh, I have to pay $50. So I'm concerned as an employee about paying the $50. What incentive do I have as an employee to go to the $500 provider? It doesn't matter to me because my employer is picking up the remainder. So this is where the consumerism came in. Employers are saying, we know employees are spending more time researching buying a new car than they are their own health care. So we really felt, when we think about consumerism, that employees need to get the doctor out of the driver's seat when it comes to their health care. We want them to go to the doctor. We want them to write down the recommendation. We want them to then go back and do their research. There's many, many things. We talked about technology, and I'm going to show you some of the tools at the end. But we have available for employees to go on the website, to look up the doctor, look up the quality ratings, look at their health plan to see if there's a second opinion that might be warranted. So what we're trying to do is to say, yes, you work in tandem with your doctor, but let's just do every single thing the doctor says. We want you to be in charge of your health care. So when we looked at that as employers, we're saying, okay, how then can we turn this around and incent employees? What's in it for them, again, to become better consumers of health care? And what type of a plan could we offer that would make that happen? And this is how, in 2003, those account-based health plans came into being. Now on this slide, the top blue is what had to happen from a legislative standpoint to be able to make those plans attractive. So if you look at 2003, is where Congress approved the tax advantage status of the medical savings account. And when I say tax advantage, I mean the money that goes in from an employer, the money that an employee contributes, the interest earnings, and then when the money's taken out for healthcare expenses, none of it is taxed. So that really opened up and made those very attractive for many people. I don't know if you have ever heard of the 401k plan in the US, which is our retirement savings plan. Those contributions go in pre-tax as well. The interest earnings are pre-tax. However, once the person starts taking out the money for their cost of living expenses at retirement, the tax man is right there. So those types of plans are taxed. So the medical savings account is very, very different. There is never tax going in, there is never tax going out. However, the tax people said, well, there's a limit to our generosity. So we're going to be putting in a maximum. So the maximum that can go into a health spending account, and this was back in 2004, was $2,600 for an employee, $5,150 for a family. Moving on the spectrum, in 2010, you heard references to account-based health plan today. You've heard references to ACA. This act was significant for employers. In addition to many of the good things that it did, such as any plan that you offer, even if it's an account-based health plan, every preventive care service and drug will be paid at 100%. We used to also stop our coverage for dependents at age 23, and the law moved it to 26. The other last part of the ACA is there used to be limits on different services. Those and pre-existing conditions had to be taken out of our health plans. But the biggest factor, and you heard that from both Ron and Cesar mentioned, is that 2020. Obviously the act is very sweeping and it goes over a number of years, but basically it says to employers, we're going to be setting a limit on what we think is appropriate for you to be spending on your health care. And if you, employer, spend more than that, then you're going to be having to pay the government a 40% excise tax over the amount that we set. So it's really putting us on notice that we have to continue to control our healthcare costs because no business really wants to have to pay that additional 40% that isn't able to be written off as a business expense. And then you'll see in 2015, we had the legislators increase the contribution limits. So currently, the maximum amounts going in are $33.50 and $66.50 for each year. The bottom is actually showing the same thing as in this slide in terms of where it started and the percentage of employers that are offering the program. Now, many of the employers, the blue bar at the end, 43%. Many employers offer it, and we do too, as an option. It's not the only health plan our employees are allowed to pick. We have something every single year. It's called open enrollment, and an employee can decide if they didn't like the plan they picked the prior year, they can change during that period of time. But 43% of those that pick the account-based health plan with the savings account, that 43% of the population has picked it from an employer. The 24% is the number that's very close to what Louise had talked about. That red bar is where employers said, we're only going to be offering the account-based health plans. You're not going to have any traditional plans to choose from. And we think because of that 2020 year, we're going to see more and more employers just offer account-based health plan. It's called full replacement of traditional plans. With the health savings account, the other thing the legislator said, if in fact this health savings account can only be offered if you have an underlying deductible plan, we say your minimum for the US dollars of a deductible is $1,300. Ours, when we put it in, was, and most employers, when they put in the plan, put in a deductible of about $1,500 US dollars. And again, the plan can be used only for medical expenses. The plan's portable, and if the employee uses the funds for anything other than medical expenses, there's a penalty. So how does it work? So what I'm showing here is kind of a side-by-side of the account-based plan and how it works with the health savings account. So if we're looking at the left side with the health plan first, I'm going to be giving you the amounts that Roche has and put in, but we have the preventive care, and I mentioned that's 100%, and that's a good thing because many employers were worried if you put these plans in, people aren't going to spend the money to get preventive care. Well, they don't have to worry about it because we do pay that at 100%. After their preventive care is when the annual deductible of $1,500 kicks in. Then the next level is once the deductible is met, we have a 90% coinsurance. So after the employee basically has satisfied their deductible and they go for an office visit, and the office visit's $200, they're still going to have to pay 10%. They are going to have to pay $20 to the doctor, even though they've met their deductible. The out-of-pocket limit is what we call a safety net, and for Roche, the safety net is $4,000. So after the employee, and includes the deductible, has spent $1,500, and unfortunately having a bad year of medical expenses, and the 10% that they contribute is $4,000 or more. It's cut off at $4,000, and then our plan kicks in everything else going forward at 100% for that year. They call them different things. Some, as they might say, the platinum plan, the gold plan. We decided to call our plan the health choice plan. And the reason we called it a health choice plan is it's really an employee's choice at the time of service on how they want to use that health savings account. So for the health savings account, the very first year, Roche put in for an employee $1,100 for an employee, and we put in $2,000 for a family. And then getting to the wellness piece, we said if you do your health risk assessment and you get your biometrics done, we're going to give you another $250. So looking at what we as employers put in against the deductible, an employee effectively has reduced their deductible significantly if in fact they wanted to take out of their health savings account every single time they went to their doctor. The employee could also contribute, and I'm going to show you at the end in terms of give you some information on how many employees, in addition to what Roche put in, wanted to put in their own money as well. I talked about the wellness incentive, and then, of course, interest is accrued and there's investment earnings after you have been in the plan for quite some time. And that's what we do when we talk to our employees about this plan. We said you need to take a long-term view and how you can accumulate those savings. Because we know, basically we talk about that 80-20 rule. So 20% of our employees actually are responsible for 80% of the cost. So you've got 80% of your employees who basically do go to the doctor, but they're not significant. They might have the flu one year, they might just go preventive care. They can build up their savings account by quite some time. So we called it the health choice plan, again, because when the employee decides they're going to need to go to the doctor for everything other than preventive care, at that point of service, they say, I'm going to pay for this because I want to keep my savings account growing, and I'm working right now, so I have some discretionary money to pay that now because I see the value in keeping that. And particularly, again, like Denise had talked about, there is no retiree medical, and so employees are concerned about having enough money in retirement in order to pay for their health care. Now I wanted to show you the experience of, in 2014, what our enrollment looked like and what we're projecting it to look in 2017. You can see we offered 4 different plans in 2014. The Premier PPO plan was the highest plan, and of course, when you think of Premier, you think of the most generous plan. That was a 100% plan, and it cost the employees from a contribution standpoint the highest amount. We have 4 different tiers of contributions for our employees, so the lower paid employees pay less, and the highest paid employees obviously pay more, but we feel that's a more equitable way of charging contributions for our employees. But as we're looking at putting the health plan in, the employees were given tools to actually do the calculations. Under each of the plans that we offered, what is your contribution? They're able to get from the insurance carrier what their health care claims were the prior year, and they could project the next year. Now, a lot of them could use just, oh, I don't think anything's going to happen. Others know, well, I'm going to be pregnant, or I'm going to have to get my hip replaced. So they can do the math, and a lot of them did. And so we had quite the migration out of that Premier PPO. Now, they all didn't go into the account-based health plan. Again, we understand that the account-based health plan might not be for everyone. But we really want to make sure when they select their plans at open enrollment, they're making informed decisions. So we're hoping we have an 18% participation for our employees in the account-based health plan. And as you saw, beginning in 2003, it's a slow burn in terms of getting the number of employers to offer these plans. So we're patient. We think every single year we're going to have additional participation in the plan, and we're patient, and we understand it's not everybody's plan. One of the things that we did is we asked Towers to help us project over a 3-year period by putting these plans in what we could expect for savings. So from 2014, you see our costs were about $17,000 per employee per year. And in 2015, so this is a real number, we actually saw a 3.5% reduction, which we had not seen in a number of years. So we added, I'd like to say it was because we just added the account-based health plan. But if you think again about those circles, we had many other things that were happening that helped us reduce our cost by 3.5%. And what we're predicting for the remainder of this year is an increase of a little less than 1%. Because again, it's not really appropriate to say we're going to continue reducing our cost. But what we're trying to do is control those increases. And our executives have said to us, if you can just come in lower than what the national average is, we're happy with that. So this is just one of the decision tools that we have for employees when they decide on what plan. It says, where do you live? How much are you paid? What tier are you in? And what premiums do you want to see? This one is the tool that will show employees. They come out of their doctor. Doctor says you need an MRI. It's also we have it apps on the phone, so the employee can go in to this company, say, I need an MRI, how many within 10 miles, and tell me the cost for each of those different providers. And up at the top, you can see it also tells the employee how much they're going to have to pay based on whatever provider. So the range for an employee on this MRI example, $372 if they haven't met their deductible, up to $1,100. So which one do you think the employees will choose when they're using their health savings account? And also the other picture that shows the application on the phone, that's for the savings account. So they basically can be looking at both things to say, this is what my cost will be, and oh, by the way, this is what my health savings account looks like if they choose to use that money. The very last thing I just wanted to share with you are the results of the health savings account. So we were in it for a year and a half. 18% of our employees have a health savings account. 72% of the employees are contributing their own money. When we looked at the end of 2015, because we were curious on how many people are going to just use the health savings account as a pass-through, as soon as they have an expense, they go to the health savings account. There was only 126 of our employees, which is 3.5% of our population, that ended the year with a zero balance. And there was 18% that used it, still had some balance, but did use it for some of their expenses during the year. So that leaves us with 82% of our employees that picked the account-based health plan had the full balance at the end of the year. So that definitely spoke loudly to us about how this plan is definitely attractive to some employees, and they're using it to help pay, we believe, that we keep accumulating to help pay for their retiree medical expenses. And the average, at least now, the account value, and of course it's only the first year, is $2,400. So we think that we are speaking to some of our employees. They obviously are feeling good about the plan as, again, it's a cost efficiency for them and for the company. Thank you.